Joshua Patterson, welcome to the journey. And I know we've known each other for a handful of years now. And actually, I think we originally met through my son Caleb. And when you were at Rockford University, I think you were in graduate school at that time, correct?
Yes, sir. I was
Yeah.
actually a grad assistant in the Lang Health Center.
Nice, nice. Okay. And so let me just explain a little bit what the journey is about. The journey is a show just trying to capture individuals, just ordinary people who are doing some extraordinary things just with their own story. For some people, it's failing. Maybe they had some setbacks in their life and how they failed forward and how what they learned from those setbacks. And other individuals, maybe they had some stuff go on, but they really wanted they had something driving inside. They wanted to make a difference in the community, and how can they give back, and how can they, try to make a difference. And I know ever since I've known you, when Caleb and I first introduced us, that has been a big part of your story. But we'll jump into all that. But before we do all that, for the people who are listening, what does Josh do for fun? What do you do for fun when you get an opportunity for fun? What do you do for fun?
Absolutely. Man, first of all, I just want to say thank you. I appreciate it, the opportunity to be on the journey. As you mentioned, we've known each other for some time, and I just respect you, as a man and as a father, and I appreciate this platform that you've created.
Right. Thank you, man. Thanks.
Absolutely. But as far as what I do for fun, man, I'm a young father as well, have a
Yeah.
4-year-old son.
Yeah.
And I always think no matter what I'm doing, that's my primary responsibility. So I really have grown to enjoy after 4 years fathering. That's a labor of love. Also, man, I've been a writer for about man, since I was a senior in high school. So it's many moons, maybe about going on 12, 13 years now. And so I love to write. I write songs. I write poems. Um, and yeah, so I consider myself an artist. Also making music. So actually in 2018, I recorded and released my first studio album. So that was a lot of fun.
Nice.
Playing guitar
Okay.
and reading, I would have to say probably my most favorite pastimes.
Nice. So tell us a little bit about how did you get introduced to the worlds of the arts, the world of writing? Who kind of opened that door up for you, how did you discover that?
Yeah, absolutely. My senior year in high school, I had a government teacher. Shout out to Mr. Cruz
Mhm.
in Zion, Illinois, at Zion Bend Township High School. Mr. Cruz, he had a senior project that he made everyone. He introduced us to spoken word poetry, and as a project, he made all of the seniors in our class actually write a piece of spoken word, and that was my introduction. And just fell in love with it. At the time, they had there was a show on HBO called Deaf Poetry Jam,
Okay. Yep.
and that show was actually organized by Brother Simmons, Rev Run's brother. And I don't know, I just fell in love with the art form. I love the fact that you could say anything um, and express yourself. There was no limitations on how you could express yourself. And that was something that was new to me. And I was actually celebrated and accepted through Richard Simmons and all the other producers and the artists themselves. So I just fell in love with that. I think a lot of times in my life, especially up until that point, there was always a rule for how you had to be, you know, and that was the one platform that there were no rules and you can be truly who you were.
Okay. Well, I could go in a couple different directions on that one. So, I mean, let, let me let me start with this one. So Mr. Cruz was your actual government instructor for your senior year, and that seems to be a little bit of a different type of project for of a stereotypical government teacher. So, how did that fit together, and how did that all play out? Besides, in your case, obviously for you, it opened up a door. but that seems to be a unique project for a government class.
Yeah, I think that Mr. Cruz would be proud if I described him as unorthodox in his methods. Um, but I definitely, to me, the connection that it made, um, he always encouraged us to use our voices,
Mhm,
and the way that he taught us about democracy, being a system that was really for the people, and what should work for the people. Um, that was the connection I felt like he was making. And the way that he taught about some, I always took away from that class that, most people vote their pocketbook.
mhm,
And the way he taught, I don't know what I took away from the class, I'll say, is that, traditionally the stereotype of Democrats is that, you know, they're for the working class, you know, and Republicans tend to be individuals who are upper middle class or upper class individuals. And so it's interesting that if you take somebody that might be middle class and by whatever means they work themselves into a higher social economic class, at that time, going back to them voting their pocketbook, would they, based on the stereotypical norms of those parties, now convert to Republican
mhm, mhm,
because it might benefit their pocketbook more now? I think a prime example, uh, with the tax hike, or when we're talking about taxes and taxing individuals who make more money, it's easy for me to say, oh yeah, absolutely, let's do that if I'm below that threshold. But at the point where now we're talking about taxing my money, now I'm singing a different song. So
yeah.
that's something, I think that he was just I think Mr. Cruz would make the point of how important it is when we're talking about true democracy for our government to reflect the voices of the people that, the citizens that it's serving. And then at the same time, taking a look in the mirror, us as citizens, you know, um, with these in a two-party, a major two-party system, um, is it really about principle, and is it really about morality, or is it more so about money?
Mhm, mhm.
And oftentimes, I think that's what has divided, a lot of individuals at the core. It's been about, how does this particular thing impact me? And when we're talking about qualifying that, a lot of times people are looking at their pocketbook.
Mhm. Yeah, yeah, and and just with my own personal story, my dad was a factory worker, so lower class, just maybe broke that threshold up to that middle class. But prior to that, both of my parents came from pretty low, pretty pro low economic. They always had everything they needed, but there was they did they had what they needed, but they didn't know what they could have, type of thing.
Mm,
And so I grew up in that situation. Go to become a social worker, so that's stereotypical. If you're a social worker, you have to be democratic. And and then later, when I opened up KB counseling, now I'm a business owner, and I'm like, okay, some of these things, they're shifting. So it is very interesting. But I never necessarily ever was a ticket, just a straight line ticket person. It was more about who is going to be the best leader, who's going to be the person who's going to represent the because it because I may be one way physically at times, and then I may be another way socially, and I may be another, regarding different topics. I move over, and I would, for me, I don't call that wishy-washy. I call that it's 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 a much more of a continuum than is these two black and white categories.
yeah, no, and I see that, and I think that, you know, um, the unfortunate thing, I wish that especially for my generation, and I think I can say this now, generation below me.
Yeah.
um, I think that it's when we talk about there's a decade, but I'm 31, so individuals that being able to vote at 18, I'm a decade at least, um, removed from an 18-year-old. Um, but I work with 18-year, I work with young people day in and day out,
Yep.
and I definitely think that there's an opportunity around civics. And some of the conversations I have with 18-year-olds, you know um and even individuals older than I am. I think across the board, across the um I think there's an opportunity. Sometimes people are blaming people for things they don't necessarily have the capacity or capability to resolve.
Mhm. Mhm.
And I see that definitely on a local level. People talk about the school board or the superintendent, you know, and they just don't have a thorough understanding of the system. If we're talking about the public school system, you know, it's there's a plethora, there's levels and there's layers to this one issue that you might have, and it's like, how do we work within the system to um, create systematic change? And I don't know if, and this is anecdotal. These are just the people that I engage and interact with on a daily basis or at whatever point. I think when we talk about, we go to the polls to vote and not necessarily knowing what we're voting for, because there's maybe a gap or a blind spot in understanding what the civic duty is of that particular office and what that particular office has the ability to impact. And so we don't really know, sometimes people don't know how, that what they're voting for and how that actually impacts and I think impacts their lives. But there's a sensational component to at least American politics. I don't even think the candidate themselves, especially when we talk about the president, to me it's almost like a theater, where you know before to even apply for the job is, how would you look or how would you come off to a majority of Americans, you know um versus, all right, where do you stand on these particular issues, and down to what a politician says, the political the presidential candidates, everything that they said, typically is picked through with a fine-tooth comb, and if you say this way, this is how it will feel, or this is how it'll come off to the individuals that are watching. And I just think that to me can, it's things that they're saying, they can politicize things that are very real in ways that aren't real, and that impacts the way that people behave and how they feel about themselves and the world around them. And I think that can be dangerous.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um,
Well, and I think you make I think you bring up a great point, and maybe in the last 8 years, 12 years, maybe more so than any other time, recognizing that the limitations of the position of president of the United States has, because if that individual doesn't have the ability to lead Congress into following what he or she is trying to do, then there's this divide, and it ends up being this group versus that group, and I think the president only has as much power as they can influence the Congress, the House, and the Senate to take that suggestion. So you're right, to know that not only voting for the president's important, but voting for who you're putting into the U.S. Senate, who you're putting into the U.S. House of Representatives is equally as important, because that's going to have a lot to do with if the person's ideas even get moved forward.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And I think, some people have just gotten turned off. They feel like no matter who's in what seat, my life is going to be the same.
Mhm.
And I don't think that that's necessarily true. But perception is reality. And if people feel like that's true, they're going to behave based on that. And so, I think, I'm optimistic. I work with young people every day. And I definitely think that we all want some of the same things.
Mhm.
We all, it's just, um, I think it might look and sound different for, it's kind of like religion. There's so many options, so many things to choose from. But at the end of the day, I think it's a lot of them, a lot of people are looking for the same things in religion, no matter what religion it is. And that's the same thing out of government, out of life, you know. So I'm excited. I think we just had, got out of a pretty, uh, you know, long and, I think it was a pretty uh, eventful, election cycle. And I'm optimistic, but I definitely appreciate the seeds that Mr. Cruz, thinking back to my government class and how important it is to use your voice. Because I think if you are using your voice, you know, and I think what's also important, my brother, he talks a lot about avoiding the echo chamber, you
Yeah.
know.
Yeah. Tell what does he mean by that? What does Matt mean by that?
Yeah, shout out Matt Simpson.
Yeah.
Uh, I think he's just talking about the importance of diversity,
Mm.
you know, and when you have individuals that think and act and sound just like you,
Mm.
all around you, nothing that you say is wrong, nothing that you say, and not necessarily even wrong, but just critiqued,
Mhm.
and you say something and the people around you, since they think and behave and they live and they are just like you, they say the exact same thing back to you. So there's really no balance, no weight and balance or checks and balances for anything that you say. And I think that, I mean, again, that can be dangerous, and even just from a growth standpoint, it can stunt your growth, when if everything Kevin Polky said, everybody said, yeah, you're right. Yeah, you're right. Yeah, that sounds right. And they were genuinely thinking that because, they kind of have the same experience as you and background. And there's just, we all have blind spots. And so the value of having people with different perspectives around you is that maybe they can see something that you might not be able to see just because they have a perspective that you don't have. And that is the way that you can optimize, any effort. Because we all have blind spots, but if there's people around the table who have different ones than I have, maybe out of 10 blind spots, we'll hit 8 of them. Um, so just avoiding the echo chamber, I think that helps you be innovative, that helps you be creative, that helps you be uh, uh, solutions oriented in ways that you might not be just independently or by yourself.
Well, I think, one of the things that just regarding the role of not just presidency, even though I think that's a huge role, but also regarding like a business leader, is that there comes great responsibility with that that role or that position. And for me, that's what I'm hoping, right, is that this particular leadership will take and own that responsibility to cast a vision, not just to get elected, but cast a vision for people to be able to get behind and and
Mm,
and really follow. Because it's okay. So now it's done. You won. Okay, now the work begins, and
yeah.
I think that's the responsibility of a leader of any organization, is to cast a vision that is going to be life giving, and allow growth to happen. Because I appreciate the idea of everyone being a yes man to Kevin, but not only does that sound really boring to me, but I think I know how dangerous that's going to be, and I've surrounded myself with people And the different companies that I run who don't say yes, and don't get me wrong, it's real uncomfortable when they tell me no, and I don't initially like it and anything, but I know because I trust and respect them that I know that they're saying no or challenging me because of the bigger purpose, the bigger good that we're trying to accomplish.
Yeah. Yeah, no, I think that, and sometimes, I mean, I'm just now, this is the first time, so I'm a year, a little less than a year into a position, where I'm supervising individuals that are being paid.
Mm,
So I'm quote unquote somebody's boss.
sure.
And I definitely see how, I'm not the, you know what I mean? I don't consider myself the smartest person in the room. I think collectively, I think what makes me smart is that I value the perspective and the ideas. When we're thinking through an issue, I'll present it to the group, that if especially if it's going to impact them or their job and what they do and how they do it, I'll present it to the group and say, this is what's being proposed and this is why. So I think the initial buy-in is the fact that I'm explaining to them why something needs to happen in this particular instance. And my thought process comes from factoring, I'm like, I want to see it from every in which way. And so my initial presentation, or maybe there's been an initial, a first perspective um, or decision being made, a tentative decision being made, I explain this is the tentative decision, this is why. And once you lay it out, more often than not, if you're a good leader and you thought about it from as many angles as possible, they can probably get behind and understand where you're coming from. But then they might say, okay, well, in addition to that, what about this or what about that? Um, and it just adds so much to the solution. And I think that if if more people did that, when you're making a decision for thousands and thousands and thousands of people, you know, um, you want, as close as you can get, what I'm saying, you're still 30,000 feet away.
Mm. Yeah. Oh yeah. 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 Yeah.
you know?
Yeah. Well,
So
and to be able to invite people into the process, a handful of different things come. Now, it's definitely a much more laborious, process. And if your ego isn't in check, and if you haven't done some work on yourself, then
mm,
your toes are going to feel stepped on, and you're going to feel like, oh, they're not respecting me, or whatever. But if you trust the process, not only do you get probably a better outcome, but along the way, everybody individually and as a team grows, and
yeah,
that's bigger than probably even the project that we're actually working on. Is that it everyone's growing through it, and that to me that's equally as important. It's kind of like sports, right? It isn't about necessarily if you get the W or not, because it's probably not going to be the first or the last game you're ever going to play. It's about what did you learn, what did you learn about yourself in that play. um, and so I do think it's that's what I love about studying leadership and being in a role of leadership is that it's for me it's an ongoing learning experience. And what works somewhere, okay, I may have to morph and flex a little bit in a different direction to do it something different in a different setting or whatever.
absolutely. No, I agree. And that's one thing we talk a lot about. We're in the influence game. We're trying to be influential. We're trying to influence the youth that we work with to do something positive, and they have influences that are trying to get them to maybe do something negative. So what are other things that influence young people? Music is something that always comes to mind. And music is something that's constantly innovating. You have artists that have been making music for decades, and they're still trying to use a sound in a way that hasn't been used before. So it's constantly innovating, and it's influencing, and we're trying to influence the same individuals that music is influencing. So how can you know we should be constantly innovating as well. um, as influencers, and how are we innovating? And I think that you have to, we talk about artists that are constantly working with different producers and maybe having a bunch of people in a room. I've heard some of my favorite artists say that they've made some of their best songs only because there was another really great artist sitting right next to him, and they felt like sort of a competitive spirit, where like, okay, like I have to, it challenged them in a way that they, to make the best, whatever they were working on at that minute, it had to be the best. No, I can do that better. I'm thinking of a rhyme, like I can make that better, because they had some of the best artists, kind of right next to them. So, I think that speaks to the people that you have on your team, you know, and really, I think just your ability to get the best out of people, even if they're not sitting next to the quote unquote best. It's like, how can you make sure that everybody in the room is giving their best to the effort or to the team? And I think that sometimes when we look at leaders, people in leadership, they might be in leadership, and they might not be, the reason why they're in leadership might not be because they're the best leader or they're qualified to be a leader, especially in certain settings I've been in, corporate especially. There's people who have made strong commitments to the organization. Maybe they stayed up really late or they worked really long hours, but is that what really qualifies somebody to be a great leader? And I don't know if that necessarily, is what got them into a leadership role. Exhibiting characteristics of a great leader maybe weren't necessarily the things that got them there. So
Right. Yeah. Yeah. No, no, I agree with you 100% because I've seen that happen numerous times that somebody's really good at their job or their role that they play in the job, and at some point they can't give them any more raises, so they promote them. But the person is good at their job. They're not necessarily good at leading people, and so they end up really being unhappy. They accept the promotion because you're supposed to, right? You're supposed to say yes, thank you, and you move on. But you may not be at all, have a skill set to now all of a sudden be leading people. So they end up by default managing people, and people don't want to be managed, they want to be led. And I mean, who wants to be managed? I don't, it's like, I didn't want to be managed when I was a child. I don't want to be managed now as an adult. So I want to be invited into something bigger than myself.
absolutely. And that's one thing I got to shout out my brother Matthew Simpson one more time, because he's somebody that's always consuming knowledge and giving it away. But he was reading a book, and I had to ask him exactly what book it was. But he said in the book, it said that great leaders manage themselves. And I just thought that was very profound. And I found that even in my own, the role I'm in now, sometimes I'm like trying to make sure everybody else got what they needed to get done. And then I look at my list and it's still unchecked. you
Yeah.
know? So yeah, man, I think I agree with you, like I think that we are right now, these are historic times. You know what I mean? We're less than 7 days away from out of a removed, I should say, from an historic election. And I think leadership is definitely has a spotlight on it right now. The idea and the concept, and certain designated leaders. And I am optimistic, and I'm excited to see what happens for the next 4 years. So
Yeah.
I'm not gonna hold my breath, but I'm gonna keep
Yeah.
my fingers crossed.
Yeah, yeah. I very much, I feel the same way. I really hope in the midst of a year to remember, right? With all the things that have happened in 2020, it clearly is an opportunity for change and for growth and for the ability for some things to be um, significantly different. I think anytime we have, this is right when this all came down, like everyone, I was concerned, worried, not knowing for sure what does this virus mean, what kind of impact it's going to be, and waiting for the next shoe to drop and the next restriction to happen or whatever. And I remember at some point saying, I can't keep responding with fear here. I can't, I have to, I gotta, I got to ground myself. And so I started asking myself different questions, and then my staff and my clients, like, what obstacles can come out of this chaos? Or I'm sorry, what opportunities can come out of this chaos? So what, the greater the obstacle, the greater the opportunity for growth. So how can we find opportunity of growth in the midst of all this chaos going on? And that seemed to give me a little bit of a breathing room to start looking at, okay, I know that during time periods of setbacks, that's when, you know, innovators and creatives, they come in and they create what the people need in the midst of that darkness. And well, this is a pretty dark time, so it's the opportunity is here, for that innovation and creativity, to happen, and so that, and the other question I was asking and still ask, what have I learned about myself that I wouldn't have learned if all this wasn't going on?
Mm.
And it's just in just that in itself. What would I've learned? What have I learned, or I am learning about myself that I wouldn't have learned if the pandemic or the election or the whatever wasn't happening this year? Because I don't
Yeah.
tend to learn things when things are easy. You know.
Right. Yeah, no, I agree. Like, you know, I in the work that we do here at Youth Bill Rockford, we challenge the trainees every day, to just gain a deeper sense of self-awareness and think about, you know, number one, what do the people that know you, what do they know you for?
Mm,
And we talk a lot about social capital. And I think that, now more than ever, you know, we have to um I think it becomes a question of value, you know? Um and to me, when you start to look at do you value yourself? That's what we talk a lot about in self-respect. But um I think people can say that they value whatever they claim to value, but to me, how you qualify what somebody values is looking at how they spend their time, their money, and their energy.
mhm,
And we've, been able, you can spend some money and spend some time in a different time zone. You know what I mean? You can travel. We've always, been, especially as Americans with a blue passport, we've had the privilege of traveling anywhere in the world. All you got to do is pay for it.
mhm,
Um, we spent endless hours. The 40-hour work week doesn't exist anymore, especially if you want to be a top performer and a top performer in whatever organization or industry that you live and work in. And so we've spent 60 plus hours a week on our professions and building our organizations or our credibility um, within certain networks. And I think now it's becoming more and more evident with the fact, okay, there's a travel ban. you know Now you can't put your eggs where you used to put them. You know what I mean? um and it's definitely forcing people to sit down, and I think it's really showing you, either as you reflect, man, I used to spend so, like, I'm itching. I'm going through withdrawal symptoms because I can't do the things that I used to do in the ways I used to do them. And I used to get, I didn't know before, but I was addicted to that.
mhm,
You know what I mean? Like, I used to, like, uh I got so much comfort and so much of who I was invested in doing these things that now I can't do. And I feel less than, I feel like I'm questioning my worth and my value, um, because I can't do some of the things I used to do that used to get me through the day.
Yep, yep, yep,
You know what I mean?
yep.
So I think it's, it's really showing, I think shining the light on, where people spend their time, where people spend their energy, and where people spend their money, and what they truly value. And now we're having to do it, and and invest those things, you know, being forced to invest those things, maybe in areas that before we claimed we value, but we didn't invest in.
Mhm.
Um, so I think it's definitely been a time for self-reflection. And as we come out of that time, it'll be interesting. I think the world will never be the same. Um, but I hope, people have taken that time, because now you got more time. You know what I'm saying?
Yep, yep,
Now you working from home.
yep,
You know what I mean?
yep,
Hopefully you got more energy.
yep.
You're not spending as much, not going out. Maybe substituted it with Amazon, but hopefully, people have been able to reserve some of their time, their money, and their energy, and spend it. And I'm privileged. I should say that. I have a salary job. I've been working the entire time. Some people have been scrambling. You know what I mean? To make ends meet during this time. So I think I'm speaking from a very, a privileged perspective, and the fact that I've had more time, and I've had more energy, and I've had more money, because, I haven't been spending it on maybe frivolous things that I was spending it on before. But I know a lot of people in that position.
Sure,
And,
sure. Yep,
so I think it's definitely raised a question of value, and even value in human life. You know what I mean? There's been entire governments, municipalities. I heard the mayor of Las Vegas specifically say, on the question and the topic of, should we open our economy and allow people to, to travel, to Vegas, when there's a health pandemic,
yep.
a very serious public health issue. And the mayor of Las Vegas said people die every day. So I think, it's really shined a lot of light on what people truly value, even through the election.
Yep.
Something that my current executive director, William Chapman, he says a lot. Shout out to Will. You know, some some people are loyal to people and not loyal to principle.
Yep.
And I think we've seen a lot of that
Yep.
over the past, I don't know, year, 6 months since the pandemic has started, you know. But yeah, I definitely can appreciate, like you said, um, the double-edged sword, of a lot of the hurdles and obstacles we've had to overcome in 2020. On one hand is, felt oppressive at times, and then at the same time, really shown given us a lot of opportunity, whether that be to self-reflect, or to grow, and fiscally, financially, and morally as people.
Yeah. I definitely think it's been an opportunity for us to challenge personal rules, or rules that we have been following that maybe we just unconsciously followed, meaning like, this is what I've always done, so this is what I do.
Mm,
And then all of a sudden we can't do those things, and then we find out we gotta wrestle with that. We gotta, now how am I gonna, so what do I do that I can't do that thing that I just do it?
yeah.
I started lifting weights when I was 11 years old. I'll be this coming week I'll be 53, and
Mm,
um, and I've been lifting weights for 42 years, and most of that 42 years it's been at a gym. Well, I haven't been in a gym since March,
mhm.
and still been, set up a workout space down in my basement, and still doing, workouts 4 days a week. And I'm not 100% sure I want to go back to the gym, because I can spend my time, added time to stretch, to meditate, to have my quiet time, and can still get my workout in. And I don't have to commute. I don't have to wait for equipment. But you would have asked me a year ago, I said, no, 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 I don't work out at home. I work out at the gym. So,
Right.
you know, and then you take that away, you figure it out. You figure out what you're going to do. And even when I had the option to go back, maybe next week. So,
Right.
so let me hop topics for a second. So I'm curious how how how, how did you get into like this whole aspect of like who modeled for you this idea and who invited you into this idea of helping people and making a difference not only in individuals like the individuals that you work with but then also a larger aspect of community. So tell us a little bit about where that story came from, who are some influencers in your life that obviously that you know Mr. Cruz was a huge piece of that and utilized, you know, it doesn't surprise me that now that I think about it, a good out of the box government teacher is of course going to use uh, the arts to be able to express political views. It's been done throughout our you know especially in American history, you know, during the 60s and during different time periods they've always musicians have always been and artists have always been a voice for um, for injustice and desiring justice. So it doesn't surprise me. I wasn't thinking that when I first asked you that, but now reflecting on it, I'm well. Of course, Mr. Cruz is going to invite you into that, you know. So, but regarding making an impact on individuals as well as a community, where those seeds get planted?
Sure, absolutely. So one of the things that I always say, and I truly believe, is that I was raised by the universe. And I say that because, and that's not to discredit my biological parents or my family by any means. At the same time, I think it's about a lot of times we have expectations of people for because of the roles and the titles that they might have. And what I've learned is that unspoken expectations aren't realistic expectations.
Yeah.
And so I don't know. I guess what I'm saying is I can look back on at my life and on my life, and at different points in time, I can always remember there being, a coach or a football player or somebody at church or even just somebody, within the neighborhood that I just, was close enough to me that I could, they could expose me to something or say something to me that intrigued me or made me just think a different way. And I just think that sometimes we discredit or we disqualify how the impact of your village, and how important it is to have a village and a tribe, of different people. I've been influenced by, you know, people who will never know, that man, like you just the way that you dressed, like somebody, at church, they always just had a certain way of dressing. And I always just admired that, you know. Um, but there's definitely some staples that have been in my life. Coach Isaac, one of my coaches in high school, Miss Bird, my third grade teacher. um, some of the local greats, Victory Bell, first Black alderman in Rockford, Illinois. Of course my parents. I think that in my bloodline, if you look back, Patterson men, my from my grandfather who had, a Black-owned beauty supply store in North Chicago, Illinois. My father, who's always been an entrepreneur, always had a side hustle, you know. And my mom, you know what I mean, who, you know, always taught me to save, like never spend your last dollar, you know. Um, to my stepmother, who I always watched, she always worked through corporate America, but she always also served at the church. She always told me that there's no such thing as an unemployed saint, and so she But she always, my stepmom always invested in the things that she claimed to believe in. And that was powerful for me. And so I just think it was something I was always exposed to growing up, and then being able to go to places and do things that I never imagined I'd be able to do. And then when I look back and figure out why I was able to do them, it was because somebody saw something in me or invested in me in some way. And so I feel that same obligation when I look back at my life. I've made probably more bad decisions than good decisions, but the few good decisions that I have made, some of them saved my life. And I just, uh, I think that you have to acknowledge that. When I talk to very successful individuals, my mechanic, for instance, Gottman Automotive, Joe Gottman, you know what I mean?
He's a good guy. He's our
Great
my
guy.
mechanic. He's my mechanic too. He's a great guy.
Great dude, man. And I hope he don't mind me, since I threw his name out there. But I talked to people a lot and I was asking him, like, how did he know he could do what he was doing? Like, how did you get the idea that, man, not only can I work on cars, but I can own an auto repair business and provide jobs and for, I don't know, maybe like I always see at least 5 to 10 people that work there.
Yep.
You know what I mean? Like, be a job creator.
Yep.
And he told me a story about when he was a young child. His father, he had an issue with his bicycle, and he approached his dad, and his dad took his bike completely apart and then rebuilt it right there in front of him and fixed the issue. And he credited that experience that his dad, you know what I'm saying, may not even remember. I don't know if his dad's still around, but maybe if you asked him, he may or may not even remember that.
Mhm.
You know what I mean? Um, but that was the spark that has now led to him, you know, being a job creator and having his own business, being an independent, an entrepreneur and creating jobs for people. And helping countless people, what I'm saying, get to work on time because
Yep. Yep.
because they
Yep.
got, you know, providing a quality service for people. So I just think that we don't give enough credit, to the villages that have truly raised us, and so there's countless people that I have to thank. But I love the work, that I do. I've been blessed to be working here at Youth Build Rockford, and I just know the value of, because I recognize the value of the people who have invested in me. I know that I didn't do it all by myself.
Mhm.
I think that there's a thought, an idea, especially in Western culture, that if somebody's poor, they're poor because they made a ton of bad decisions. And I am where I am because I made all the right decisions.
Mm.
And it's like, no, you just never got caught,
Yeah.
like, or somehow you made it out of a situation or a circumstance, or you had somebody within your network that you can call. And, that's why I think in the work that, that I'm doing, I'm blessed to do now, working with people. I just know, like, what if I didn't have that person to confide in, or that, if I wasn't exposed to a certain thing, or somebody never invested in me in the ways that the people that around me have, how, where would I be at right now? You can never disqualify, going back to the story I told about, Joe Gottman, like, what if he didn't have a father?
Mhm.
You know what I mean? Like, he
Yep.
told the story of how an experience he had with his father led to him now being an entrepreneur for over how many decades, and providing jobs and providing a quality service, helping people for decades. All was sparked by an experience he had with his father.
Mhm.
If What if he didn't have a father?
Yep.
You know what I mean? Like, how would his life be different?
Yep.
And I think those are the type of things that get discredited and disqualified when we're talking about human services, providing human services. And sometimes there's decisions that are made within human services by people, for people, by people who have never been in the circumstances or predicaments that they're making, uh, of the people that they're making decisions for. And I'm not saying that they're not qualified just because they've never been in that situation or circumstance, but I definitely believe that individuals that they're making decisions for, their perspectives and opinions have to be a part of the decision. Otherwise, it's more or less not going to be a feasible or a viable solution.
Yeah.
Um, but
Yeah. Well, I think you're 100% right, because to to s- to not necessarily, I mean, it's kind of like, you've been involved with Shatter Our Silence, and been involved with, where our MC, last time we had an in-person event, a fundraising event, you were our MC, did a phenomenal job. But when we originally put the board together and continue put the board together, I I knew that it was really important to me that the board always include at least one young adult or adolescent, at least one individual who had been directly impacted by suicide, either a mom who had lost a child to suicide, or someone who had been suicidal and now was on was in recovery from that. Um, or a sibling, they've lost a sibling or something, and then also then someone who works in the profession, of some capacity, because we can have a lot of different people who want to be involved, and donors and different things like that, but if we don't have those key individuals that can represent the young adults, the significant others of those young adults, and then the professionals that work with them, then that takes away from, then we're not really fulfilling the mission. And so those meetings aren't always easy to run, because sometimes there's a lot of talking, and there's a lot of things going on, but I think the experience is so much richer because we get that input, and it holds us accountable to why we're doing what we really do with it.
man, I think you hit it on the head. And I think like one of the challenges, I think you can't really, sometimes it's hard to grow in comfort, and you probably notice even more like as a, somebody who's done professional weightlifting, you know, I mean, if you're always lifting 5 pounds, I mean, like at some point you need to go to 10 or at
Yeah,
least
yeah,
7,
yeah, yeah,
you know
yeah,
what I'm
yeah,
saying?
yeah,
If you want to see that growth, you
yeah,
know what I mean? And I think that's a big challenge, I think naturally we crave comfort, but at the same time, like you said, like having individuals that are different than you at the decision making table with you, it might not be comfortable all the time, and that's probably maybe a reason why some people, and maybe it's unintentional sometimes why there's no diversity, but I think being use the word intentional. It's easy to say, well, we invited everybody, but only my friends came.
mm-hmm,
You know what I mean?
yeah,
Like, and stop there. Like, who'd you send the invitation to? You know what I mean? Like, how did you send the invitation?
yeah,
Certain people, you emailed everybody. You know what I mean?
yeah,
Like, there's certain people, maybe that's not the best method to reach the demographic or individuals that you claim that you want to make a connection to or with. Sometimes you have to meet people where they are, and not necessarily where you are. I see that with young people all every day. It never fails. I'm talking to them about something, and it's like I'm going over their head with it because I'm almost 20 years older than them. You know what I mean? So it's like for me to really make a connection with them, I have to use a certain language, in certain mediums. I think language is a medium. You know what I mean? So I think the language is important as well. And sometimes we're using language that doesn't resonate with certain people, but we're saying that we want to make a connection with those people, but I'll be
so
off.
give us a like a 2 minute highlight of Youth Build has been around for a long time, and so what exactly, for the people that are not familiar with Youth Build and what Youth Build does for our community, does for our youth, why don't you give the audience a little bit of what is Youth Build about? What are you really trying to do? And then if there was like a story since you've been there, something that you saw, and you don't have to mention any names or anything, that was like, okay, now I know I'm in the right place.
Absolutely. Um, so I'll say there's two programs, if I may speak to, or efforts that I'm involved with, that work directly with youth.
Okay.
One of them is the Wabango Leadership Council, which is a nonprofit here in Rockford, Illinois, with the mission of enhancing leadership capacity within the African American community here in Rockford. Um, and then there's also Youth Build Rockford, which the two are definitely not necessarily connected at all, just two different efforts that I'm involved with. Um, and the Wabango Leadership Council, one of the efforts that we've done for the past 6 years, our biggest, I guess, initiative is a college tour that we've done every year for the past 6 years. And it's just been a tremendous effort taking youth from the city of Rockford, Illinois, and it's a multi-state college tour. So we go, we've been all the way to New York, to Florida, to Texas, Mississippi. So and we prioritize HBCUs, which is historically Black colleges and universities, because culture is something that's very important to us, and culture being the way that people experience the world. And I think the reality is that we're all in this world, together, but people are experiencing the world different ways, for different reasons. And so that culture piece, we want to expose the youth in our community to culture that might not exist, or may exist, but they might not be connected to it here in Rockford. Also, another thing I'm involved with is definitely Youth Build Rockford, and that is my full-time job that I report to day in and day out.
Mhm.
And actually, so Youth Build USA, Youth Build is a national network of programs, and Youth Build USA started in 1978 in Harlem, New York, and there's actually a woman called Dorothy Stoneman,
Mhm.
and she started the organization. And um, I would I was I would say that there was an opportunity to tap into the positive energy uh, of young people, and they saw an opportunity in Harlem at the time for also blighted, to solve the opportunity of blighted properties within the community. So the connection between the tapping into the positive energy of young people and solving the issue of blight and the need for affordable housing, those two came together in 1978. I think they're very much at the foundation of youth build programming, and also civic engagement, um, and social justice as well. I think are components as well. But um, so youth build programs across the country work to uh, impact young people positively, individuals that might have dropped out of high school or be out of high school for whatever reason. Maybe they don't have enough credits to be on track in high school. Um, and so youth build programs serve that population of individuals across the country. And there's various components to our programming, but construction is one of those components. And so they get, it's a workforce development program, and
Uh,
they learn the skills um, that are transferable to any work environment. So some people say, well, what if I don't want to be in construction? Actually, there's 15 to 25% of individuals that graduate from youth build programs actually go into careers in construction. But the beauty of it is the individuals in our program are learning life skills, employability skills, um, leadership skills, civic engagement. So an example is a life skill, being able to communicate, being able to take feedback, or what people might say constructive criticism.
Mhm.
Somebody might be telling you something that you might not want to hear. How do you accept that, and then, move forward in a constructive way? That's a life skill. And that's something that you also need to be able to do in a work environment. So on the work site, as the individuals are building affordable housing in a youth build program, the work site is also used essentially as a classroom, where a lot of the theories and the ideas that we might be teaching in life skills or employability skills in the classroom can actually be practiced. And so you might be performing a task on a work site, and the instructor might come up to you and say, "Hey, man, you kind of like 2 inches off." Looking at the blueprint, it was actually supposed to be here, and you have it there. So being able to take that feedback and that instruction, and then, even though like you might have been working really hard for the past hour on that, it's wrong. You know what I mean?
Mhm.
So how do you take that feedback in a constructive way, respond in a constructive way, and then actually move forward so that you can get a positive result? That's something that you can take into any work environment. So we're a workforce development program. We do teach construction. We do teach life skills, employability skills, leadership skills, and also networking, civic engagement, um, and leadership. So individuals that leave our program, the idea is that because we're funded primarily through the Department of Labor, that once an individual graduates from our program, they'll be more employable than they were prior.
Sure.
That
Yeah.
that also means, sorry, the last thing I'll say is individuals can also earn their high school diploma through our program as well. So by obtaining a credential in your high school diploma, also an industry recognized construction certificate, and all the various other, OSHA 10, CPR, first aid, there's a plethora of credentials that individuals earn through our programming. Um, and sorry, I'll be shameful if I don't mention AmeriCorps. They all become AmeriCorps members and earn community service hours as well. So through all these experiences that they're having through our programming, the idea is that, yes, when I go to earn a job or go interview, I'll be able to interview well. I have a strong resume. I'll have a strong cover letter, but I'll also be able to speak to the experiences that I've had in my community and on various work sites. And based on those experiences, I have these particular skill sets that a lot of employers are looking for.
Yeah. Well, I think of something that we were talking about earlier regarding the arts as well as athletics, that, they, at the end of the day, art, mimics life,
Mm, mm,
and really sports is a metaphor for life, right?
mm,
It's so less about if we win or lose. It's so much about what have we learned, what skills have we developed, what characteristics are we developing. Because I know for me, regardless if it was, all conference in football or Mr. USA when in bodybuilding, those things don't necessarily didn't really mean anything, except they became the template for me to then use to be a therapist and then later to be a business owner. It
mm,
was the same template that I used regardless if it was wrestling and football or bodybuilding, or later as to become a counselor and therapist. Then I took that same template and did it toward running a business and starting a business, and that I think that it's the environment may be carpentry work and construction, but it's really about that just happened to be the environment in which you have the opportunity to learn these skills. And for individuals that are, I know for me, when I was working in the school system, being able to utilize youth build for students that did not learn best in traditional settings, it,
yeah.
it was a perfect, or maybe didn't have good experiences in those traditional settings for whatever reason. and mostly it had to do with, struggling with stuff at home or struggling with different things, that they came to school so distracted that they got labeled and identified, and then they started buying into that label, that they needed an alternative way of learning and an alternative educational process so that they could then be who they really were created to be. So I give you guys tons of credit, man, because it's what you do with Youth Build is huge, and it definitely it's so much more than construction, and yeah, definitely more than construction.
Yeah, and you said I could tell a story, and I'll be brief, I
Yeah,
promise.
yeah, yeah, yeah. Go ahead.
But no, I think to that point, there was a trainee. So component to our program is that all of our, we call, participants in our program trainees, and that all trainees have to wear a uniform every day to get into that habit. And otherwise, we'll ask you if you don't mind going home, and we'll try it again tomorrow.
Hmm.
And one particular trainee, he didn't have on his uniform one day, and I brought him to the side, away from everyone else, and I asked him, I said, hey man, where's your uniform? And he said, man, I don't have it today. So I said, okay, well, if you don't mind clocking out, and try it again tomorrow. And so he left that day and didn't come back to the program for 2 weeks. And when he came back, I brought him into my office so we could have a discussion. And he was, he seemed like he had something on his chest that he needed to get off. He was just acting different towards me, and which is fine. But I asked him, what was going on when I brought him to my office, and he essentially told me that he felt like that day 2 weeks ago I disrespected him when I asked him to clock out and go home for the day. And my initial reaction was, did I disrespect you or did I hold you accountable? And I think I've told this story to a couple different people, and I think that was really the perspective that a lot of them had, was that he disrespected the program. And this is what somebody told me, by not having on his uniform. And so in that conversation I had with the young man, that was kind of my energy that entire time. And he left, and I had to think about it for the rest of the day. And I was kind of thinking about, did I handle that situation the best way possible? And as I thought about it more, I called him back into my office, and I apologized to him. And the reason why is because in the initial conversation, what he told me was, it's not what you say, it's how you say it. And as I thought about it, I really felt like he was telling me that I hurt his feelings. And one thing that I've learned is that feelings aren't debatable. When somebody tells you that you did something to make them feel a certain way, even though you might not, I think a lot of times what we tend to do is like defend ourselves and defend our intent. It's like, that wasn't my intention. So like, no, like that's not what really happened. And it's like, no, like that's what happened. You know what I mean? And it made, whatever happened made them feel that way. And so um I think sometimes, we can get so caught up on trying to force feed people, employability skills or workforce development skills, and social services. We were trying to we're trying to cram down their throats, what we feel like is good for them, and doing our job, you know. I think sometimes we lose sight of the person. Like, this is a participant in a program, and this is my responsibility in this program. And we lose sight of the person that's sitting right in front of us. And I don't know, he taught me a big lesson that day, because that was me, in the first conversation. And then the second conversation, the first thing I did was say, man, if I heard you correctly, you said when I asked you to clock out and go home that day, you felt like I disrespected you. And he was like, yeah. And I said, and it wasn't what I was saying. It was because of the way that I said it to you. And am I correct in thinking that? He said, yeah. And I said, I apologize, man. Like, it definitely wasn't my intention, to speak to you a certain way or to speak down at you. And I did it that day and I apologize. And sometimes I move really fast in the morning. There's a lot going on. And so I can see how I can maybe lose sight of that. And moving forward, I'll be more conscious of that to ensure that it doesn't happen again. Do you accept my apology? And he was like, yo, like, yeah, like I do. And I don't know if anybody's ever maybe apologized to him like that before or
Mhm.
acknowledged his feelings before.
Yeah.
And I think that impacted his motivation to want to be in this program, that interaction that we had. And I think that employers even now moving forward, especially with millennials, like I've talked to a lot of young people, they've gotten their feelings hurt at work and walked off the job and never came back.
Mhm.
And I think that employers are even more importantly going to have to start looking at their motivation quotient, a little bit differently, because millennials now with this new generation, my grandparents, regardless of how they felt, like they were gonna go to work.
Yep.
You know what I
Yep.
mean? You couldn't hurt their feelings enough for them not to come to work.
Yep.
But nowadays, that I think that's impacting people's motivation. And I just learned a lot about being able to when we're working with people, no matter what our intended outcomes might be or what our job description is, you're working with people. And sometimes, hurt people. Like you have to address the issue of that person before you can address the issue as that they have as an employee,
Yep.
and or a participant or whatever other title they might have. And I learned that lesson that day.
Well, I think, we started off this conversation, about talking about leadership and talking about, being in a role, right, of being a supervisor or a president or whatever it may be, that it comes with great responsibility of to do just what you just did, to be grounded enough to say, ooh, I don't know if I'm okay with how I handled that.
Mm,
I'm going to reflect on that and I'm going to own my part and bring this young man back in and have a conversation with him about it, not to defend yourself, but to clear it up with him. And then he then has the opportunity to do whatever he's going to do with it. But what you modeled for him is what you've been taught by all those different people in your past that
mm,
have planted those seeds and modeled for you. That's what, not only as leaders, but specifically us male leaders, it's even more important and more responsible to model that and keep our egos in check and step into that space to humble ourselves when we've could have done it better,
mm, mm,
you
mm, mm.
know and because it isn't done enough. Instead, we're so busy, there's so many times people are tempted to defend their situation and defend their perspective or their intention, as you said. And that doesn't necessarily bridge the gap. And
Yeah,
I think what you just said, what you did with that young man, that was huge.
yeah,
We need to bottle that and send that out.
right.
So, my friend, I know I've been keeping you way too long, and this has been a long day for you. So, if there was one thing that we were going to wrap up with today, what's one thing that you would want the listeners to know about Josh and know about what Josh is trying to do for the community?
Man, um, I would have to say that we need each other. You can't build a box big enough, to where you can't make walls big enough to where you can keep everybody out that you don't want. Where you can't build walls big enough where you only invite your friends to the party. When we're talking about the global community, and so I think we all have a responsibility, you know, uh, to create the spaces that that we want to live in. And there has to be opportunity for everybody. One thing that I always say is that if you don't make money, then you take money, and it's just about opportunity. It's not about being afraid or having fear. It's just about, everybody needs opportunities, and it might not look like you want it to look. It might not sound like you want it to sound, and we have to just, check ourselves, sometimes, and just realize that, you know, the world, it's a big place, and there's, people from all different, perspectives, and, we have to make room for that. We have to make room for each other. It's a big world. And I think that, there's enough room for everybody, you know? So you just got to make room in your heart first, you know? So that's it.
Josh, you're a good man, and I know that I have a much richer life because you've been in it, and I appreciate you.
Likewise, man. Thank you so much. I appreciate the journey uh, and this opportunity to spend time with you, man. Thank you. You are definitely one of those people in my village that I talked about that I've learned a lot from. I continue to learn from every day, man. You're an entrepreneur, a father, a husband. Man, you wear so many hats. A bodybuilder, somebody. I want my body to look like one day. I gotta work up to that point. But thank you so much for having me, man. I
Yeah,
appreciate it.
no problem. Josh, thank you, and you keep up doing everything that you're doing. All right, my friend. I'll talk to you soon.
All right, boss.
All right.